The scorching afternoon sun bore down on the bustling parking lot of a downtown shopping center in Miami. The humidity hung thick in the air, making every breath feel heavy. Maya Carter, a sharp-witted 36-year-old corporate attorney, stood outside her sleek black BMW, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. Her driver's side door was flung open, and she was frantically searching through the cluttered back seat. Papers, receipts, and an empty coffee cup littered the floor as she rummaged for her missing purse. Her heart pounded with frustration. She was already running late for a crucial meeting at the courthouse, and now, of all times, she couldn't find her wallet. Come on," she muttered under her breath, her fingers sifting through the mess. Her phone vibrated inside the car's cup holder, the screen lighting up with yet another missed call. Her boss. She clenched her jaw, ignoring it for now. If she didn't find her purse in the next 30 seconds, she was going to lose her mind. Then she heard it, the low hum of an approaching vehicle. Her spine stiffened as she glanced up through the windshield, her heartbeat faltering. A police cruiser was rolling slowly through the parking lot. The officer inside, a middle-aged white man with sharp, piercing eyes, was staring directly at her. She knew that look. Maya quickly turned her attention back to the car, pretending not to notice him. She didn't have time for this, not today. But that didn't matter. The cruiser came to a deliberate stop just a few feet away. Her stomach tightened. A door slammed shut. Heavy boots hit the pavement. "Hey!" The deep, commanding voice cut through the air. Maya froze, her fingers still resting on the leather seat of her car. She inhaled deeply, already bracing herself for what was coming. Slowly she straightened, pushing a stray curl from her damp forehead. The officer approached with an air of authority that was too familiar, his hand resting on his duty belt. His name tag read, Officer Reynolds. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. Maya exhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral. "Not today. Just stay calm." "I'm looking for my purse," she said, forcing her voice to remain even. "I misplaced it in my car." Officer Reynolds' eyes narrowed, scanning her from head to toe before shifting to the BMW. His scowl deepened. "You got ID on you?" His hand didn't move from his belt. Maya's fingers twitched. "Here we go." "Like I just said," she repeated, keeping her tone steady. "I lost my purse. That's what I'm looking for. My ID is inside." He didn't like that answer. His stance shifted, and his fingers curled slightly near his holster. "Uh-huh," he muttered, his voice dripping with doubt. "Step away from the vehicle." Her pulse spiked. Maya bit the inside of her cheek. "Don't escalate this, just comply." She took a slow step back, lifting her hand slightly to show she wasn't a threat. "This is my car," she said firmly, hoping, praying that logic would kick in. "I just need to find my purse, and I'll be on my way." But Reynolds wasn't interested in logic. His eyes darkened with something that made Maya's stomach churn. "Lady, you're acting real suspicious," he sneered, taking a step closer. "You expect me to believe you just lost your purse in this fancy ride? Looks more like you were trying to break in." Maya clenched her teeth, biting back the frustration burning in her throat. She had been here before. Not this exact scenario, but this feeling, the weight of being doubted, being seen as a criminal first and a human second. "I already told you, this is my car," she said again, her patience thinning. "I'm a corporate attorney. I just got out of a meeting and I misplaced my—" "Oh, so now you're a lawyer?" He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Got any proof of that? 'Cause right now, all I see is a woman snooping around a car that doesn't belong to her." Maya's jaw tightened. "I don't have my ID because it's in my purse, which is—" Yeah, step away. Hands where I can see them." Her breath hitched. Maya took another cautious step back, keeping her hands visible. "Listen," she started carefully. "Just run the plates. You'll see this car is registered to me." Reynolds smirked. Nice try. You think I'm just gonna take your word for it? He reached for his cuffs. A rush of heat flooded Maya's face. This can't be happening. Wait, what are you doing? She demanded, her heart hammering against her ribs. You're under arrest for suspicion of vehicle theft. The cold click of metal snapped around her wrist. Shock crashed over her like a wave. Are you serious? She snapped, twisting slightly as he yanked her arms behind her back. But he wasn't listening. He was already marching her toward the patrol car. Mia's mind raced. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As Officer Reynolds shoved her into the back seat, she cast one last look at her BMW. Her own damn car, sitting there with the driver's door still open. Her purse was inside, and she was the one in handcuffs. This was about to become the biggest mistake of Officer Reynolds' career. The police cruiser jolted as it came to a stop in front of the Miami Central Precinct. Inside, Maya Carter sat stiffly in the back seat, her wrists still bound behind her in cold metal cuffs. The air in the car was thick with the stale scent of leather and sweat, but that was the least of her concerns. Her heart pounded, not in fear, but in fury. This wasn't the first time she'd been misjudged, but it was the first time she was being dragged into a police station, accused of stealing her own car. Officer Reynolds stepped out first, slamming his door shut before opening hers. His grip was firm, almost too tight as he yanked her to her feet. Maya clenched her jaw, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. "Let's go," he muttered, his tone dripping with casual authority. Maya's heels clicked against the concrete as she was led inside. The bright fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed overhead, casting an artificial glare across the room. A few officers glanced up as she passed, their gazes flicking between her and Reynolds. No one questioned anything. They saw a black woman in cuffs, and just like that they assumed she belonged there. Her stomach twisted. Reynolds led her toward the booking area, pushing her into a hard plastic chair against the wall. She inhaled sharply as the cuffs dug deeper into her wrists. Across from her, Reynolds leaned against the desk, chatting with another officer as if this was just another routine arrest. Suspicious individual caught snooping around a luxury car in the shopping district, he said with a smirk. Claims she's a lawyer. Can you believe that? Maya's hands curled into fists behind her back. The officer he was speaking to, a younger man with uncertain eyes, shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at Maya, then back at Reynolds. "Did you run the plates?" the young officer asked. Reynolds scoffed. "What for?" The younger officer frowned. "If it's her car, we'd know in seconds." Maya's heart leaped. Finally, someone with common sense. She straightened, her voice measured but firm. "Yes, run the plates. You'll see I own that car. Then you can uncuff me and apologize." Reynolds turned to face her, amusement flashing across his face. "Apologize? Lady, you're lucky I haven't added resisting arrest to the charges." Maya let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Resisting? I've done nothing but comply while you play judge, jury, and executioner. Do your damn job and check my information." His smirk faltered for a split second. Then, as if realizing he was being challenged, he squared his shoulders. "Yeah, we'll get to that when I say so," he said coolly. Maya exhaled slowly. "Control your anger. Stay focused." She looked to the younger officer. "I need my phone call, now." The young cop hesitated. "That's standard procedure, right?" Reynolds rolled his eyes. "Fine. Let her have her little phone call. Won't change a thing." He unhooked her cuffs just enough to let her move one wrist freely before leading her to an old landline at the corner of the room. Maya reached for the receiver, shaking the stiffness from her fingers as she punched in a number she knew by heart. It rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice picked up. Mark Edwards. Relief washed over her like a wave, but she kept her tone sharp and controlled. "Mark, it's Maya. I need you at Miami Central Precinct, now." A beat of silence. Then his voice tightened. "What happened?" Maya cut a glare toward Reynolds, who was watching her like a hawk. Let's just say a certain officer arrested me for stealing my own car. No ID check, no verification, just assumptions. A low curse came through the receiver. I'm on my way. Don't say anything else. Maya hung up, turning back toward Reynolds with an icy stare. Your career is about to take a very interesting turn. He smirked. Oh, I'm shaking. Maya just shook her head, taking slow, measured breaths. She wasn't scared. She was furious. And soon, so would the entire legal system when they heard what had happened here today. The tension in Miami Central Precinct was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maya Carter sat on a stiff plastic chair, her wrists aching from the earlier handcuffs. Across the room, Officer Reynolds leaned against the desk, arms crossed, his smirk unwavering. He was confident, cocky, even as if he knew he had already won. He had no idea what was coming. Minutes ticked by. The door suddenly swung open. In walked Mark Edwards, Maya's longtime friend and one of the most respected defense attorneys in Miami. Dressed in a sharp gray suit, his every movement radiated authority. His steel-blue eyes swept across the room, landing on Maya first, taking in her restrained posture, her stiff shoulders, the quiet fury in her gaze. Then his attention shifted to Reynolds, his expression hardening. Who's in charge here? Mark's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge to it. A younger officer hesitated before gesturing toward Reynolds. That'd be him. Mark's lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. He stepped forward, standing toe-to-toe with Reynolds, though he didn't need to say a word for the balance of power to shift. You want to tell me why my client, the state's corporate attorney, is sitting in your precinct without cause? Reynolds let out a scoff, but for the first time there was a flicker of doubt in his expression. She was acting suspicious, he muttered. Couldn't provide ID. I did what I had to do. Mark didn't even blink. Suspicious? His voice was calm, sharp. Suspicious enough to arrest her without running her plates? Without verifying her identity? Without probable cause? Reynolds shifted his weight slightly. She was digging through a car she couldn't prove was hers. That's probable cause. Mark let out a humorless laugh. You're telling me you had time to cuff her, book her, and file your little report, but no time to check the registration of the car? He tilted his head. Or is it that you just didn't want to? A few other officers had started paying attention now. A silence settled over the room, the weight of Mark's words sinking in. Reynolds' jaw tightened. I don't take people at their word. No, Mark said, voice clipped. You just take them at their skin color. The words landed like a slap. Reynolds' nostrils flared, his posture going rigid. Watch it, lawyer. But Mark wasn't done. No, you watch it, because this is unlawful detention. This is racial profiling. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. He took a step closer. And when this is over, I'm making sure your badge is the first one on the chopping block. A flicker of hesitation crossed Reynolds' face, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. I don't answer to you. No, Mark said smoothly, pulling out his phone. But you will answer to the police chief, the mayor, and the entire bar association once they hear what you've done today. Reynolds' face paled, but he held his ground. Mark turned to the younger officer, the same one who had questioned the lack of a plate check earlier. What's your name? The officer hesitated before answering. Detective Harris. Good, Mark nodded. Detective Harris, can you do me a favor and run the plates on Maya Carter's BMW? Let's clear up this little misunderstanding before we take this higher. The younger detective shifted uncomfortably, looking between Reynolds and Mark. Finally, with a short nod, he turned and walked toward a computer. Reynolds clenched his fists. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, finally, Detective Harris spoke. Cars registered to Maya Carter. No theft report. No prior issues. It's her vehicle. The room went silent. Maya exhaled slowly, her arms crossing over her chest as she turned back toward Reynolds. "So," she said coolly, "am I free to go?" Reynolds' mouth tightened into a thin line, but he didn't respond. Mark's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Apologize." Reynolds scoffed. "For what?" Mark didn't break eye contact. "For wrongfully arresting a black woman without cause, for humiliating her, for abusing your authority." He tilted his head. "Or would you rather have this conversation in court?" A muscle ticked in Reynolds' jaw. He inhaled sharply through his nose, then turned to Maya. "You can go." Maya arched a brow. "That's it?" Reynolds gave her a hard look. "What do you want?" "The same thing you had no problem taking from me." She stepped closer. "Respect." Reynolds held her gaze for a long moment before finally muttering, "I made a mistake." Mark smirked. "There it is." Maya rolled her shoulders, shaking off the tension that had settled in them. "You made a mistake, all right. And trust me," she grabbed her purse from the desk where it had been sitting the entire time, "this isn't over." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, Mark following closely behind. As the precinct doors swung shut behind them, Maya inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the humid Miami air. "That guy is going to regret today for a long time," Mark murmured beside her. Maya didn't smile. "It should. Because for every woman like her who had the power to fight back, there were hundreds, maybe thousands, who didn't." And that was something she refused to ignore. 2 days later, Maya Carter walked into the Miami Police Department headquarters, her heels clicking sharply against the polished tile floors. The air inside was cool, sterile, filled with the quiet hum of officers going about their business. But today wasn't business as usual. She wasn't here as a detainee. She was here to make sure Officer Reynolds faced the consequences of his actions. As she stepped into the conference room, she immediately locked eyes with Chief Daniel Hernandez, a tall, graying man with a reputation for being tough but fair. He sat at the head of the long wooden table, his expression unreadable. And there, seated to the side, was Reynolds. He didn't look quite as cocky now. His uniform was still crisp, but the smug arrogance that had once clung to him like a second skin had cracked. His jaw was tight, his posture stiff. He looked like a man who had just realized he was no longer the one holding the power. Maya took a seat across from him, placing her hands on the table with deliberate calmness. Chief Hernandez cleared his throat, folding his hands together. "Ms. Carter, first, I want to formally apologize for what happened 2 days ago. I've reviewed the incident, and it's clear proper protocol was not followed." Maya tilted her head slightly. "That's one way to put it." Hernandez exhaled through his nose. "Officer Reynolds," he turned toward the man in question, "you failed to verify Ms. Carter's identity, you refused to check her vehicle registration, and you escalated the situation unnecessarily." Reynolds' face was stone. "Due to these failures," Hernandez continued, "you are being placed on administrative leave without pay, pending further investigation." A flicker of something crossed Reynolds' face, whether it was shock, anger, or realization, Maya couldn't tell. "Wait, hold on," Reynolds finally spoke, his voice laced with indignation. "I was doing my job. She couldn't provide ID. I followed procedure." Maya let out a short, humorless laugh. "Procedure? You mean assuming a black woman in a nice car must be a criminal? That procedure?" Reynolds turned toward her, his nostrils flaring. "It wasn't like that." "Wasn't it?" she shot back. "Because you didn't hesitate. You didn't stop to ask reasonable questions. You didn't even check my plates. You just saw me, assumed I was up to something, and decided my word wasn't good enough." Reynolds clenched his jaw but said nothing. Chief Hernandez leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Miss Carter is right. You didn't do your due diligence. You jumped to conclusions, and now we're dealing with the fallout." Reynolds scoffed. "So what, you're just gonna throw me under the bus?" Hernandez's eyes darkened. "No one's throwing you anywhere, Reynolds. You did this to yourself, and frankly, I'm disappointed. This department can't afford officers who act on bias instead of facts." Reynolds' fists tightened against his lap. his face a deep shade of red. Maya sat back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Tell me something, Officer Reynolds," she said coolly. "If I were a white woman digging through that same car, would we be sitting here right now?" Reynolds looked away. He didn't answer, because they all knew the truth. Chief Hernandez sighed and turned back to Maya. "Ms. Carter, I want to assure you this matter isn't being taken lightly. Not only is Officer Reynolds facing disciplinary action, but we are reviewing department-wide training to ensure situations like this don't happen again." Maya arched a brow. "You mean like the mandatory training that's already supposed to prevent this?" Hernandez's jaw twitched. He knew she had a point. "I understand your frustration," he said carefully, "but we're committed to making real changes." Maya exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "I've heard that before, Chief, and yet here we are." Reynolds' voice was bitter when he spoke again. "I didn't do anything that bad." Maya's eyes snapped to him. "You put me in handcuffs, marched me through a police station, and humiliated me for a crime that never even happened. You used your power to make me feel small. And the worst part? You didn't care." Reynolds opened his mouth, but no words came out. Chief Hernandez pushed back his chair, standing up. "This meeting is over. Officer Reynolds, you'll be escorted out. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty until further notice." Reynolds stiffened but didn't argue. The reality of the situation had finally hit him. A uniformed officer stepped into the room, waiting by the door. Reynolds slowly stood, casting one last glance at Maya. "This is bullshit," he muttered under his breath before turning on his heel and walking out. Maya watched him go, her expression unreadable. Inside, she knew this was just the beginning. As the door closed behind him, Chief Hernandez turned back to her. "Ms. Carter, is there anything else we can do to rectify this?" She studied him for a long moment before replying. "You can make sure this never happens again." Hernandez nodded. "We will." But Maya had heard those words before. As she walked out of the precinct, stepping into the humid Miami air, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't done fighting. Not until real change happened. And this was just step one. 1 week had passed since Officer Reynolds had been removed from duty, but for Maya Carter, the fight was far from over. She sat in her office, the city skyline stretching wide behind her, the Miami sun casting golden streaks across the polished glass. But despite the beauty of the view, her mind was elsewhere. The battle against one officer's blatant misconduct was done. But the system that had allowed it to happen, that was still very much intact. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Chief Daniel Hernandez. Maya exhaled sharply, picking up the call. "Ms. Carnes." Hernandez's voice was formal, but there was an unusual edge to it. "I wanted to update you personally on the reforms we're implementing." Maya leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping against the desk. "I'm listening." "We've started new training protocols," Hernandez continued. "We're working with external consultants to ensure all officers receive de-escalation and bias training. I also want to extend an invitation." Maya arched a brow. "An invitation?" "I'd like you to be on the oversight committee. You'd have a direct role in making sure these changes actually happen." Maya hesitated, not because she didn't care, but because she had heard this before, promises of change that never came. "I appreciate the offer, Chief," she said carefully, "but you know as well as I do that training isn't enough. If it were, I wouldn't have been arrested in the first place." Hernandez sighed. "I won't argue with that, but if you're involved, you can help hold us accountable, help make sure it's not just lip service." Maya closed her eyes briefly, considering. She wanted to believe that this time would be different, that Reynolds' removal wasn't just a one-time sacrifice to make the department look good, that they were actually serious. "I'll think about it," she finally said. Hernandez didn't push. "Understood. And, Miss Carter, I truly am sorry for what happened. There's a lot of work to do, but we're taking it seriously." Maya hung up the phone, staring at the city below. She wasn't convinced, but she wasn't done either. That night, she walked into a community meeting held at a small civic center downtown. The room was packed, people of all ages and backgrounds filling the folding chairs, their voices a quiet hum of conversation. The energy in the air was heavy, charged with frustration, but also something else. "Ho!" Maya stepped up to the front, clearing her throat. The room quieted. "A week ago I was arrested." Her voice was steady, but the weight of those words still sat heavy in her chest. Not for breaking the law, not for committing a crime, but because a police officer saw me and decided I didn't belong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "And let's be honest," she continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "If I didn't have the resources I do, the position I hold, would I have made it out of that station without charges?" Silence. Because everyone knew the answer. "This isn't just about me," Maya pressed on. "This is about everyone in this room who's been stopped for looking suspicious. Everyone who's been treated as a criminal before they ever had a chance to speak. And for the people who never made it out of those situations at all?" Heads nodded, fists clenched. She exhaled slowly, scanning the crowd. "Officer Reynolds is gone. But what about the next officer who thinks he can get away with this? And the next, and the next?" A woman near the front, a middle-aged mother clutching her young son's hand, spoke up. "So what do we do?" Maya's jaw tightened. "We don't let them forget." She stepped closer to the crowd. "The department wants to put me on their oversight committee. And I'm going to take that seat, but not for them, for us. Because if they think this is over, they're wrong. We're going to hold them accountable. We're going to demand real change, not just training sessions and empty apologies, but actual consequences." The room stirred. "But I can't do it alone," she continued, her voice clear, unwavering. "I need every single person in this room to speak up, to tell their stories, to show up to these meetings and demand more. If we don't, nothing will change." The room erupted in applause. And in that moment, Maya knew this fight was just beginning. 1 week ago, she had been handcuffed, humiliated, and dismissed. Now, she was about to become the biggest nightmare for every corrupt officer who thought they could act without consequences. Because Maya Carter wasn't backing down. Not today. Not ever. And that, my friends, is the story of Maya Carter. A story that, while fictional, reflects a very real issue in our society. None of the characters in this video are real, but the lessons we take from this situation definitely are. What happened to Maya is something that countless people have experienced in real life, being judged not by their actions but by assumptions. This story reminds us of the importance of holding people in power accountable, standing up for our rights, and never letting injustice go unchallenged. It also teaches us a valuable lesson. Never assume, always seek the truth, and most importantly, use your voice when you see something wrong. Change doesn't happen by staying silent. It happens when we demand better. So, what do you think? If today's story resonated with you, comment 1 below. If it didn't, comment 0. Your feedback helps us create better videos that match your interests. And before you go, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.